Hello and welcome to the second series of Lost Steps with me, Malcolm Hopkins, coming to you courtesy of Resonance FM. First of all, both Nick and myself would like to apologise for the delay in coming back on air, but this has been due to unforeseen circumstances. Just to get some business out of the way, we have changed our web address. It is now just loststeps.org. We also have a Facebook page, which is Lost Steps at Resonance FM. So if you could amend your records. So to get on with the series, today I'm pleased to be joined by Simon Wells, and we'll be talking about his book, Coming Down Fast, which is about Charles Manson. But first of all, Simon, I'd like to ask you the standard Lost Steps question. William Blake was first and last a Londoner. So what about you?
Well, I'm a country boy who was enchanted by London, and watching films like Up the Junction and Smashing Time and Blow Up, it was like a bit of a wonderland to me. So as soon as I could, I got up here and I wanted to engage in all of it. And I did a fair bit of travelling around, but I was enchanted by London and the bright lights. I suppose I was just following a bit of a Dick Whittington and saw it all. So I love it. But I live back in the countryside now, but special place.
Well, I guess the question that lots of our listeners might be thinking is, well, Charles Manson, Lost Steps is supposedly a programme about London.
Yeah.
So what is the connection between Charles Manson and London?
It's an extraordinary question that I would have asked myself if I looked at this book a few years ago, because I associate Charles Manson with California, with the whole sort of American hippie scene. I mean, where does London come into that? But during my researches for the book, I became aware that there was many strands leading off Manson, which came from London, one of which was this very unusual religion called the Process Church of the Final Judgment, which was a splinter of Scientology. And two of the early adepts of Scientology actually formed a splinter group, which they called the Process Church, which operated from a Mayfair manor house or mansion block. And they built up a sizable, for want of a better word, cult, a very idiosyncratic cult which believed that they could. It was quasi-religious in as much as they used Scientology, but they also, the leader, a guy called Robert de Grimstone, believed in this sort of alliance between Christianity and Satanism, which during the 1960s was probably quite appealing to a lot of people. This church branched out, not surprisingly, during 1967 with a chapter, so to speak, in San Francisco at the same time that Charles Manson was living in San Francisco. And he became an occasional visitor, let's say that much. But he squirreled away a lot of their magazines, and a lot of the technology of the Process Church, which was coined mostly by this chap called Robert de Grimstone, Manson incorporated into his sort of mind games and his mindset. And a lot of that dripped into this, as we now know, the cult of the family. And so that was really interesting to see that a lot of Manson's doublespeak and mad talk actually sort of had worked its way back to this strange sect which was based, as I say, in Mayfair. So that was the first point which really hooked me. I thought, well, that's extraordinary. The second point which blew me away, that there was grave suspicions at the time of the arrest of the Manson family in December 1969 that the Manson family had actually murdered someone in London in a hotel in Hammersmith. Now, as a researcher and as someone who obviously is based in the UK writing a book on American phenomena, this was extraordinary. And I really had to get to the bottom of this one. So there began an odyssey, an extraordinary odyssey into determining exactly what happened. And I feel I cracked it. I feel I got to the bottom of it. And it's not as it seems, as is a lot of the Manson family myth. And I stress that. It's a lot of, I think, myth-making is very much a part of the 60s, and Manson is no exception to that. So, to answer your question, yes, there were some very strong connections with Manson and London, remarkable as it is.
Can you just briefly talk about Charles Manson, just for the people who are not particularly familiar with him?
Yeah, and it's an interesting point. Charles Manson, it was 40 years ago, the Tate LaBianca murders, and Manson was a mediocre busker. He was a career criminal who was released in March 1967 and gravitated towards Haight-Ashbury, where as a 34-year-old man, he was a little older than the Flower Children there, but he had a charisma. And for a 5'2" little guy, it was quite extraordinary. Young people especially liked him. They felt that he had this kudos of coming out of jail. He was a musician. He also was really interested in mind control and philosophies, I mean, as were a lot of people in the 1960s. So he had an enticing package. He collected a gaggle of young followers who were loosely called the family. They jumped on a school bus, a converted school bus, I should say, and they headed off down into Los Angeles. The brief was that Manson was going to be a huge recording star. And I think if one looks on YouTube and various places, you can see early examples of Manson's music. There in Los Angeles, for a while they lived at the drummer of the Beach Boys' house, Dennis Wilson, and then they got kicked out of there and they ended up on a movie ranch on the fringes of Los Angeles called Spahn Ranch. And it was all really geared, from my researches for the book, it was all really geared towards Manson musician. This was the idea. He was going to be a famous musician. That dream collapsed spectacularly in the summer of 1969, where basically he managed to alienate the music industry. They were terrified by this guy because he was so wacky. He was so offbeat. And he was starting to become very agitated at the fact that his recording dreams were not being realised. After a sequence of events, Manson greenlighted a killing spree in Hollywood over the weekend of August 8th and 9th, 1969, where actress Sharon Tate and her friends at a house in Beverly Hills were slaughtered and butchered. There's no other word for it. The following night, a supermarket manager and his wife in the Los Feliz area of Los Angeles were also butchered to death. These were by Manson's acolytes who did this. Manson didn't take part in this. He was sitting back at the ranch. The linchpin of this case was the fact that actress Sharon Tate, wife of Roman Polanski, A-list Hollywood celebrity, was included in the murder toll. I strongly believe that it's because of the Hollywood connection that this case generated so much publicity. And so the story has got as much to do with celebrity as it has to do with anything